Hey everybody, it's Tim Veigle here with Watson Realty, and I created a little video to help you through contracts in the state of Florida. The contract that I'm going to review with you is the as-is contract for a residential purchase of property in the state of Florida. So it's important that you know it as buyers looking for homes in Florida. This is the contract that you'll most likely see. So hold on one moment as I share my screen. All right, so you should be able to see the residential contract. And as you can see, it's the as-is contract on here. Now, right here, that's where you're going to be the seller and the buyer. So this is a contract between buyers and sellers. It's not between the realtor, not between title company. It is a legally binding contract between sellers and buyers. Part one of this contract is your property description. So in here, it's going to explain what property you're purchasing. It'll have the street address, it'll have the tax ID, and it'll have the legal description. That way that there's no second guessing what property you are getting. So it's important that this is also correct, obviously. And then under the part 1D, this is the personal property. So this is what's included when you purchase the home. If you're expecting something else to stay with the home and you don't have it added in 1B, then you find out it's gone when you do your final walkthrough. Does not matter. So, but this is the stuff that it automatically defaults to. So you got your range or oven, refrigerator, dishwasher, disposal, the ceiling fans, light fixtures, drapery rods and draperies, blinds, window treatments, smoke detectors, garage door openers if they have them, thermostats, doorbells, television wall mounts. You hear that? And television mounting hardware, security gate and other access devices, mailbox keys and storm shutters and storm protection items and hardware. This is all included. Now, if you see something on here that you wanted and it's not included in here, it won't be there. Notice washer and dryer does not default. So you'd have to make sure you add in washer and dryer, because then if it's gone, it's gone. Now you go down to following items that are excluded. So if the seller is keeping an item, this is where it'll go, is under 1E. For example, they might want to keep the refrigerator. You put it under 1E, then it doesn't matter that it's in 1D, it's excluded. Notice how it says unless excluded in paragraph 1E. So this is where you would exclude stuff. So like the wall mounts and things like that, the drapes, if you want to keep the drapes. And these are questions that your listing agent will be reviewing with you. Now we go into part 2. This is the purchase price. So on your contract, you have your purchase price, and this is where we put it in here. Then you put in your escrow, your deposit of what you're going to do to hold the property. This amount could be anywhere from $1 to $10,000. It doesn't matter. And it can either a company offer, what most usually do is to be made within, and it automatically defaults to 3 days, and that's typically the time frame most will leave on there. Now the escrow agent, this isn't showing what title company you're at. This is just where the money's being held. Lots of times it's held at the title company, but in some cases it also might be held at the real estate offices. It all depends how they're set up. Watson Realty prefers to hold them at our office and deliver them to title companies. But that doesn't mean that Watson Realty is being the title company. It just held at our real estate office. Part of the reason why it benefits a buyer or even the seller to do it this way is if there is a dispute among escrows, that can be handled through the Florida Real Estate Commission. So they would do hearings on that. If it's with the title company, both parties have to get attorneys involved and go that route. And the title company won't do anything without direction of the judge and the attorneys in the agreement. Now keep on moving. So financing. So if you're not paying or additional deposit, if you want to put an additional deposit, you can. Most usually don't, but some have. Financing, so expresses dollar amount. So if you're financing the property, say it's $100,000 property and you're financing 80,000, that's where that'll go. And then at the very bottom will be the balance to close. So if it's going off the previous example, you still had 20,000 left, that'll go in there. But then if you have $2,000 in escrow, it'll show all you need to bring now is $18,000. This does not include closing costs. This is just purchase price. Now time for acceptance. So you put in there when the offer should be accepted. So if you're submitting an offer today and you put tomorrow's date, that's when it's supposed to be accepted. So if not accepted by that time, neither party is obligated for this contract. Now, if there's counter offers going back and forth, so say you submit an offer, they don't accept it by tomorrow, but the seller counters you, then that acceptance day extends 2 days from when the counter offer is delivered. The effective date of the contract shall be the date when the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initial delivered offer or the final counter offer. So effective date, all parties have signed today. Today is your effective date of the contract. So today is day 0. Closing date. So and here for the closing date, this is basically the date that your property is going to close on. So the closing of this transaction shall occur when all funds required for closing are received by the closing agent and collected pursuant to standard S, and all closing documents are required to be furnished by each party pursuant to the contract are delivered. So, and the closing shall occur on, and it puts the date in there. So this date could be February 14th, February 28th, March 17th, doesn't matter. Just has to not be a holiday or a weekend most of the time. And then notice it says at the time established by the closing agent. So you might prefer to close in the morning, but if the closing agent can't fit you in, it's really up to them based off their schedule. All right, extension of closing date. So you got 2 parts here. This is section 5. So the event closing funds from the buyer's lenders are not available on closing date due to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau closing disclosure. So this is your closing disclosure, the CD requirements. If paragraph AB is checked, loan approval has been obtained and lender's underwriting is complete, then closing date shall be extended for such period necessary to satisfy that, but not exceed 7 days. What that is saying, you have to see the consumer disclosure, closing disclosure 3 days prior to closing. So if your closing's on March 5th and you don't acknowledge it till March 4th, you have to at least extend it by 3 days at that point. So you'd be closing on March 7th and the contract automatically does that for you. Now your agents are probably going to do an addendum just to be on the safe side, but that's what that means. And then of course, in the event constituting force majora, that's a French word that I struggle with pronouncing. This is basically stuff that's out of our control. So hazard, floods, winds, hurricanes, Mother Nature, stuff that's going to disrupt us, causes any issues to where we can't close, then this could extend the closing. And being in Florida, it's not uncommon for us to have hurricanes. So occupancy and possession. So basically what this is going over is if you're going to be occupying it or if it's subject to lease. So homeowners, it's going to be a little different, or if it's subject to, we have a lease of someone that's going to be moving in there. Assignability. So this is where you may assign a contract. Most lenders prefer buyers not to sign the contract. Basically, when you assign a contract, what that is saying is, I do the contract, but I may assign it to someone else. So I might assign it to my cousin Larry, who then will take care of the contract at that point. That's all that is saying. So, but a lot of people don't like to do that. You see that a lot with wholesalers nowadays. Okay, financing. This is your first big contingency. So this is your way out to get your escrow back. Notice the financing part you can do is the cash transaction, no financing contingency. But the contract is contingent upon financing, usually within 30 days, if left blank, of the effective date. That is your loan approval period. Buyer obtaining approval of a notice, it's asking what type of loan it is. Very important to know that. Managed loan for purchase of the property for fixed, adjustable, fixed or adjustable. Most usually don't focus too much on that because things can change with you and the lender. Sellers really care about you closing the property. So, in a term of, if left bank, 30 years is what we're assuming, and buyer's mortgage broker or lender having received an appraisal or alternative valuation of the property satisfactory to lender. If either is required by lender, which is sufficient to meet the terms required for lender to provide financing for buyer and proceeds to closing. Buyer shall make application for financing within, if left bank, 5 days, but this is one I always tell my buyers do sooner than later because the financing part takes longest. After the effective date, and use good faith and diligent effort to obtaining approval of a loan meeting the financing and appraisal terms of the paragraph 8B1 and 2 from above within the loan approval period and thereafter to close this contract. Loan approval which requires buyer to sell other real property shall not be considered loan approval unless rider V is attached, which also basically means that if you're going to be doing contingencies on your home and you have to sell it to be able to buy this one, you better put that in there, or else if your loan falls through because of that, the financing contingency does not count. Buyer's failure to use good faith and diligent effort to obtain a loan approval during the loan approval period shall be considered a default under the terms of this contract. For purposes of this provision, diligent effort includes, but is not limited to, timely furnishing all documents and information required by the buyer's mortgage broker and lender and paying for the appraisal and other fees and charges in connection with buyer's application for financing. So make sure you do what you're supposed to be doing. Buyer shall, upon written request, keep seller and broker fully informed about the status of the buyer's mortgage loan application, loan processing, appraisal, and loan approval, including any property-related conditions of loan approval. So we need to keep the other side communicated on this. If you don't, then they're assuming it's fine and it's going to hurt you as the buyer. Buyer authorizes buyer's mortgage broker, lender, and closing agent to disclose such statuses and progress and release preliminary and finally executed closing disclosures and settlement statements as appropriate and allowed to seller and broker. Basically meaning lenders need to talk to buyers agents and listing agents, keeping us all informed. So normally I don't read everything on the contract, but this is a very important part for you as a buyer. If within the loan approval period, buyer obtains loan approval, buyer shall notify seller of same in writing prior to expiration of the loan approval period. Or if buyer is unable to obtain loan approval within the loan approval period, but buyer is satisfied with buyer's ability to obtain loan approval and proceed to closing, buyer shall deliver written notice to seller confirming same prior to expiration of the loan approval period. What that basically means is if you get loan approval during loan approval period, let the other side know. If you're unable to, but you're confident you will, let the other side know. But once you get past that loan approval period, if it hasn't happened, you're at risk of losing your escrow. If buyer fails to timely deliver any written notice provided for in paragraph 8B, 3, or 4 above to seller prior to expiration of loan approval period, then buyer shall proceed forward with the contract as though paragraph 8A above had been checked as of the effective date. Provided, however, seller may elect to terminate this contract by delivering written notice of termination to buyer within 3 days after expiration of loan approval period, and provided buyer is not in default under the terms of this contract, buyer shall be refunded the deposit, thereby releasing buyer and seller from full obligation. So at this point, if you get past the loan approval, you're not going to leave a notification. Seller has the right to cancel the contract too, which in that case, if we're not knowing you're in default, you can get that escrow back. If buyer has timely provided either written notice provided for in paragraph 8B3 above, and buyer therefore fails to close this contract, the deposit shall be paid to the seller unless failure to close is due to seller's default or inability to satisfy other contingencies of the contract or property-related conditions of the loan approval, specifically excluding the appraisal valuation, have not been met unless such conditions are waived by other provisions of this contract. So what that basically saying is if you're at default, you can lose your deposit except if it's something that from the seller or the property conditions. So that's very important. So that's a section to focus on because that's one easy way that if we don't stay on top of it, you're at risk of losing your escrow. Closing costs and fees. So this kind of breaks up what typical closing costs are to be paid for by the seller and by the buyer. And then it talks about title evidence and insurance. So which you should get within about 15 days. Title evidence and insurance is basically knowing that the seller has done what they're supposed to do with the title company to provide you clear title and make sure that you have no issues. Now right here, seller designates closing agent. This is typically normal in the state of Florida. Seller picks title. Buyer though, if you want to, you can also pick title. Most buyers don't because you will be paying certain fees and it will up your closing costs, give or take $1,500 or so. It varies on property and title company. Survey, so at least 5 days prior to closing date, there should be a survey completed on the property. Home warranty, you have the ability to get a home warranty paid for by the seller. So this is an option on there. Some people like it, some people don't. It all varies. Special assessments. So right here, seller should pay all special assessments prior, or you can also have it where you guys split it kind of equally based on dates of the property being owned. These are special assessments you should know going into it. You might see it on the property appraiser site for your taxes part. So disclosure. So this is what I call the catch-all be-all in the state of Florida. So anything that has ever happened in the state of Florida, these are disclosures just to disclose them to you as the buyer and the seller. So you could have a property with radon gas. It's a radioactive gas. It occurs naturally out in the environment. It's up to you if you want to do any testing on it or not. Out of my entire time, most of my buyers have never done testing on it. And only one time have I ever found a house that had radon gas issues. Permits disclosure. So sellers should disclose any and all information about permits. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just confused on the whole permitting process. So, but they'll disclose it to the best they can. They can try to assist with closing out permits, but there's no guarantee on that. Mold, your property could have mold. This is naturally occurring, especially in the state of Florida. Flood zone, you might be in a flood zone. Just because you're not in a flood zone today doesn't mean you won't be till tomorrow. If FEMA changes the flood zone map. Energy brochure. So in your contract, we're also going to provide you an energy brochure to talk about conserving energy in the state of Florida. Lead-based paint, your property might have that on there if your property is pre-1978. So you might be in a homeowners association. So keep that in mind. You have to fall under the rules of that association. Property taxes. So do not rely on the current taxes of the property by the seller because those taxes could be a lot lower than they really are. And that's because they're kind of grandfathered in and those property taxes can never adjust up to market value. However, they can adjust up to market value when a new buyer takes over sometimes. Hence why don't use it as the be all on there. Foreign investment. So if you're a foreign investor on here, FERPTA might fall into the category for you regarding certain holdings for our dear old Uncle Sam and taxes. Seller disclosure. The listing side should provide you what's called a seller disclosure. It's going to disclose everything on the property that the seller is well aware of. Sometimes they're aware of it, sometimes they're not. But it's going to disclose everything you have. You do have the inspection period, though, that'll help with that. Property maintenance. Except for ordinary wear and tear, sellers shall maintain the property. They need to take care of it while they own the property up until the time it closes. All right, property inspection. Right to cancel. So this is your next clause or contingency that's very common in most properties. It's your inspection period. So it automatically defaults to 15 days. What I'm seeing a lot of the times is people are doing 10, and because of multiple offers, we might drop down to 7. This is your opportunity to inspect the property, and based off what you find in the inspections, you can discuss repairs with the seller or completely withdraw your offer and get your escrow back during the inspection period. So very important. Anything that's important to you that you want to inspect, this is where you should do it. Look at the inspection. Know that resales, though, you're going to find issues later on and things like that. But this is your opportunity to back out based off the inspection. So you get to do what's called a final walkthrough. And this is basically just letting them know that the seller cannot prevent us from doing these. So we can do a final walkthrough, which is usually right around closing time. And it's you seeing the condition of the home, seeing if it's still in good shape. Does it meet your requirement to keep it? Now, lots of homes might still be dirty. That's not uncommon, but it's important to know that when you do these final walkthroughs, like for example, you're supposed to keep the refrigerator and it's suddenly gone. That's an issue. And that's one where don't sign until you do it. Here's where it says seller will assist and cooperate in closing out building permits. So they'll cooperate with it, but just because they cooperate, it doesn't say they have to. Assignment of repair and treatment contracts and warranties. At buyer's option and cost, seller will at closing assign all assignable repair, treatment, maintenance contracts and warranties to the buyer. So if they have anything active going on the property, once it closes, that's you. Okay, escrow agent and broker. So this is kind of explaining your escrow agents of who's holding your escrow, professional advice, broker liability. So this is kind of like protecting the brokerages from liability when it comes down to certain things. Like we talk to a lot of attorneys, we talk to a lot of CPAs, we know certain things that can and cannot happen, but it also varies. Until a professional like a CPA dives into your finances, doing one thing doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. There might be a better option for you, or you might not qualify. You know, it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges. Default and dispute resolution. So if the buyer fails to perform, you are at risk of losing your escrow. If the seller fails to perform and doesn't get anything taken care of, buyer may elect to receive and return the buyer's deposit without thereby waiving any action of the damage resulting from the seller's breach pursuant to the contract, and may seek to recover such damages. At this point, I would tell my buyers, speak to an attorney to get advice. Now for dispute resolutions, if we do end up going into a dispute, depending on how it goes, these disputes can vary. So unresolved controversy claims and other matters in question between buyer and seller arising out of or relating to a contract or breach of it, enforcement or interpretation will be settled as follows. This is important. Buyer and seller will have 10 days after the date of conflict and demands for deposits are made to attempt to resolve such dispute. Failing which, buyer and seller shall dispute to mediation. Buyer and seller shall attempt to settle disputes in an amicable manner through mediation pursuant to Florida rules. Any fees or things cost with that will be split 50-50 amongst the buyer and seller. The biggest thing is hopefully you can settle it without having to go to mediation, because when you look at the cost, you guys could end up getting nothing. Now, standards, these are just kind of like definitions, title companies, what their purpose is, what they do, title examination, the surveying of the property, ingress, egress, lease information for the property of what the seller shall provide to you. Any liens on the property, which by the way, title is obligated to do a municipal lien search and let you know if there are active liens. This one's an important one, time. So time is of an essence, and the way time is counted is by calendar days, not business days, calendar days. So therefore, with time, let's say you get an effective contract today. Today is day 0. Let's say it's 7 days is the inspection period, just talking time. And today is a Saturday, okay? So I am recording this video on January, gosh, what is today? Let me look, I don't even know the day of the week. 15th. So day 1 is the 16th. Day 2 is the 17th. Day 3 is the 18th. Day 4 is the 19th. Day 5 is the 20th. Day 6 is the 21st. Day 7 is the 22nd. So that would be day 7 is the 22nd. So the 22nd, according to my calendar of January, would be next Saturday. So that is the end of the period, right? Wrong, because it falls on a weekend, it would actually fall to Monday. Okay. Now, if that Monday happened to be a holiday, like Martin Luther King on this upcoming Monday, that Monday would be Tuesday. And that's basically how the contract reads when it comes down to that. It breaks down definition for force majeure, where it could cause issues. Again, we have hurricanes in Florida, so we have lots of issues. Conveyance definition for conveying property. Closing documents, procedures, escrow closing procedures, proration credits, so how prorations are credited. Access to property, so basically the seller has to provide reasonable access. So if we request for access, it's not saying that the seller has to give us access at the time and date that we request it, but they have to be reasonable. No, that doesn't work every time. It's not reasonable and it's going to cause issues. We'll have to extend those periods, but it has to be reasonable. Risk of loss, which I think is a very important thing on here. So if you're under contract, what if the property is destroyed? Well, risk of loss tells you that the seller is obligated to repair whatever damage is caused by storms, fires, whatever, up to 1.5% of the purchase price. So now keep in mind, most deductibles for insurance is about 1%. So 1.5% should be able to cover it. 1031 exchange. So this talks a little bit about 1031 exchange. If you're an investor out there, you know what those are. 1031 exchanges are really good to make sure you don't get charged taxes when you sell property, get new ones. So it talks a little bit about some addendums, blah, blah, blah. Again, lots of definitions in here. This is very standard, as is contract. Nothing too crazy out there. Now you get down to the bottom, which is very, very important right here. So under 19, it lists what addendums you can have. The most common addendum that you're going to see is either the condo or the HOA riders. And that's if you're in an HOA talking about that, or if you're in a condo talking about that. FHA or VA, if you're an FHA or VA buyer, you might have an appraisal contingency. That's just to let you know that your property has to appraise to ensure you don't lose your escrow on that. And the FHA VA riders, they kind of default with that in there, but under conventional, this is usually a good one to add. Lead-based paint, if it's an old home, is a good one. Sometimes you'll see defective drywall. All that is for Chinese drywall to give you the opportunity to inspect for it. And those are the biggest ones that you're most likely to see. And then under here, 20, these are additional terms. This will be the part where you might add something in there. Have to provide us HOA documents within a few days. Or here's a fun one. Must seller to contribute 3% of purchase price towards buyer's closing costs. So these are all things that could come up on there. But that's pretty much the as-is contract for you. I know it's a lot of information. Feel free to watch this video as many times as you want. This is here to help you, okay? Because the more you know, the better. And, you know, it's all about education. And these contracts do change from time to time. So hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me.